Some insults slide off like rain. Others cut deep enough to draw blood. When our newly appointed VP looked me in the eye, smiled that practiced corporate smile, and called me narrow-minded in front of the entire leadership team, I just smiled back. But in that moment, I knew I wouldn't just prove him wrong. I'd make him regret ever underestimating me. And when I was done, his career, his reputation, and the $1 million in bribes he thought were so cleverly hidden would all come crashing down in the harsh light of federal scrutiny. My name is Laura Mitchell, and I've spent 12 years making sure Westford Dynamics doesn't end up on the wrong side of federal law. At 38, I've seen enough creative accounting and corner cutting to fill a prison wing. But what I discovered that late Tuesday afternoon in our eerily quiet compliance office made my skin crawl in a way that only true corruption can. The office had emptied by 5:30 p.m., leaving me alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant whir of the HVAC system. I was reviewing a stack of contractor agreements that had landed on my desk that morning, routine work, or so I thought. The first 3 files were standard proper insurance certificates, safety certifications dated weeks before contract initiation, clean background checks. Then I opened the 4th folder. Phoenix Construction Solutions, a $40 million infrastructure contract for the Riverside Bridge renovation. My fingers stopped shuffling papers when I noticed the compliance verification stamp. The ink was fresh, almost wet-looking under the desk lamp, but the date read 3 weeks ago. I flipped to the contract effective date 4 weeks ago. Someone had backdated the compliance check. I pulled up our internal system, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The digital timestamp told a different story. The verification was completed yesterday at 3:47 p.m., after the contract was not only signed but already in execution. We had workers on site, materials delivered, progress payments issued, all without proper vetting. The safety certifications were missing entirely. In their place, a single sheet marked pending review had been tucked behind the insurance documents. Easy to miss if you were rushing, or if you wanted plausible deniability. The liability assessment that should have taken our legal team 2 weeks to complete, signed off in a single afternoon. But it was the payment structure that made my stomach tighten. Buried on page 47, in language so deliberately opaque it could only be intentional, were consulting fees totaling $800,000. Consulting for what? The description read simply, strategic advisory services related to project optimization and stakeholder alignment. Corporate speak for absolutely nothing. I cross-referenced the approval chain. Every single document bore the same authorizing signature, bold and unmistakable Mark Ellison, our new Vice President of Operations, the golden boy who'd arrived 6 months ago with promises to revolutionize our operational efficiency and break through the bureaucratic ceiling. The same man who'd stood in front of the board last week and boasted about accelerating our contract approval time by 60%. Now I knew how. I photocopied everything twice, once for my locked desk drawer, once for my bag. Then I pulled up 4 more contracts with Ellison's signature. Each one showed the same pattern: rushed approvals, missing documentation, mysterious consulting fees to companies I'd never heard of, Pinnacle Advisory Group, Meridian Consulting LLC, Evergreen Strategic Partners, shell companies, probably, the kind that exist only as mailboxes in Delaware or Nevada. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister asking if I was coming to dinner. 7:15 p.m. I'd lost track of time, absorbed in the paper trail of what was looking more and more like systematic fraud. I texted back that I'd be late, very late. As I continued digging, a pattern emerged that was both brazen and clever. Ellison wasn't just rubber stamping contracts. He was strategically selecting vendors who wouldn't ask questions, companies hungry enough for Westford's business that they'd play along with whatever creative arrangements he proposed. And those consulting fees, they all traced back to a 3-month window that coincided perfectly with his arrival. The man had been planning this from day one. I locked everything in my desk and headed for the elevator, my mind racing. In my 12 years at Westford, I'd caught plenty of mistakes, even some intentional corner cutting, but this was different. This was orchestrated, systematic, and massive. And it all led back to the man who'd been brought in specifically to clean up our operational inefficiencies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark Ellison, the efficiency expert, was efficiently robbing the company blind. The following Monday's leadership meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp in the executive conference room, all glass walls, and intimidation by transparency. Mark Ellison strutted in 5 minutes late, his Tom Ford suit catching the morning light. Smartphone pressed to his ear as he laughed at something the caller said. He didn't apologize for the delay, just flashed that 1,000-watt smile and took his seat directly across from me. "All right, people," CEO Harrison began. "Let's review Q3 performance metrics." Ellison jumped in before anyone else could speak. "I'm thrilled to report we've cut contract approval time by 62%, while increasing vendor acquisition by 40%. He clicked through his presentation, each slide a monument to his supposed genius. "We're talking exponential growth trajectory here. Real hockey stick stuff." I waited for my moment. When he paused for breath, I raised my hand. "Mark, I've noticed some inconsistencies in the recent contractor vetting process. Several safety certifications are missing from the Phoenix construction file." The room went quiet. Ellison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, before he laughed a sound like breaking glass wrapped in velvet. "Laura, this is exactly the kind of old-school thinking that's been holding Westford back." He turned to address the room. "Not me. We've got competitors eating our lunch because we're too busy checking boxes instead of building bridges, literally." A few executives chuckled. "These contractors have been in business for decades. Do we really need to treat them like criminals?" "Federal compliance isn't optional," I said evenly. "The Infrastructure Safety Act requires us to be narrow-minded." He smirked, and the word hung in the air like a slap. "Look, I respect what compliance does, really, but maybe it's time we evolved past this paranoid, cover-your-ass mentality. This isn't the 90s anymore." Someone snickered. Jennifer from sales actually laughed out loud. I felt heat rise to my cheeks but kept my expression neutral. "Some of us," Ellison continued, riding the room's energy, "understand that calculated risks are necessary for growth. Others," he glanced at me with theatrical pity, "well, they're stuck in their little compliance bubble, scared of their own shadows." Harrison cleared his throat. "Laura, we appreciate your diligence, but Mark has a point. We can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Maybe work with Mark offline to streamline some of these processes. Work with him, like I was the problem that needed fixing." "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I'll send Mark my initial findings." Ellison waved dismissively. "Send them to my assistant. I've got real work to do." Another round of chuckles. He clicked to his next slide, a graph showing revenue projections that would make any board salivate. "Now, let's talk about something that actually matters, how we're going to hit these numbers next quarter." For the next 40 minutes, I sat silent while Ellison painted himself as the savior of Westford dynamics. He threw around terms like synergy and disruption and paradigm shift until they lost all meaning. The other executives ate it up, nodding along like disciples at a tent revival. When the meeting ended, I was invisible. Conversations flowed around me as if I were furniture. Ellison held court by the coffee station, regaling Phillips from finance with some story about closing a deal on a golf course in Scottsdale. "The key," I heard him say, "is knowing which rules actually matter and which ones are just bureaucratic theater." He caught my eye as I gathered my papers and winked. Actually winked. I walked back to my office with measured steps, closing the door quietly behind me. Then I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new encrypted folder. I named it Protocol 0. If Mark Ellison thought I was narrow-minded, trapped in my little compliance bubble, he was about to learn something important. Bubbles are transparent. You can see everything from inside them. Every dirty deal, every falsified document, every dollar diverted into shadowy consulting fees. He'd given me a gift with his public humiliation. He'd made me invisible, irrelevant, someone the important people could safely ignore. He had no idea that he'd just armed his worst enemy with the perfect camouflage. I began organizing the Phoenix construction documents, creating a detailed timeline. Each piece of evidence was cataloged, cross-referenced, annotated. If Ellison wanted to play fast and loose with federal law, I'd make sure I documented every single violation in excruciating detail. The war had begun. He just didn't know it yet. The isolation began immediately. Tuesday morning, I discovered I'd been removed from the operations update distribution list, the daily email that detailed every major contract and vendor decision. Wednesday, my keycard suddenly stopped working for the executive conference room. By Thursday, meeting invites that used to flood my calendar had dried up to nothing. "Sorry, Laura," Harrison's assistant said when I asked about the quarterly planning session. "Mark said they're keeping it to essential personnel only." Essential personnel? 12 years of keeping this company out of federal court, and I wasn't essential. I adapted quickly. Every organization has its shadows, and I learned to live in them. The old compliance system, the one Ellison called dinosaur software, and refused to use, still tracked every document uploaded to our servers. It recorded who accessed what, when they accessed it, and most importantly, what changes they made. Ellison didn't know it existed because he'd never bothered to ask. I started arriving at 6:30 a.m., before even the most ambitious associates. The cleaning crew knew me by name now. Marcus, the night janitor, would leave me fresh coffee and sometimes a Danish from the kitchen. "Working hard or hardly working," he'd joke, not knowing I was documenting what might be the biggest fraud in Westford's history. The pattern became clearer with each early morning session. Contracts worth millions were being approved with single signatures, Ellison's bypassing the required 3-person review board. The construction and infrastructure deals all contained those suspicious consulting fees, always to different companies, always for vague advisory services. But it was the timing that fascinated me. Every fraudulent approval happened between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. after most of compliance had gone home. But while the system would still log it as same-day processing, Ellison was careful, methodical. This wasn't desperation or greed-driven sloppiness. This was a plan. On Friday afternoon, I watched from my office as Ellison gathered his inner circle in the glass-walled conference room. They were laughing, probably celebrating another week of exponential growth. Jennifer from sales had brought champagne. Through the glass, I saw Ellison raise his glass in a mock toast, then point in the direction of my office. The entire group erupted in laughter. Let them laugh. I turned back to my screen and pulled up the shell companies receiving the consulting fees. Pinnacle Advisory Group was registered in Delaware 3 days after Ellison joined Westford. Meridian Consulting LLC came into existence a week later, but Evergreen Strategic Partners was older. Incorporated 2 years ago, I dug deeper and found the connection. The registered agent was Ellison's brother-in-law. The pieces clicked together. This wasn't opportunistic theft. Ellison had been planning this before he even interviewed for the position. He'd probably pitched himself to Harrison as exactly what he became, a disruption expert who could cut through red tape and accelerate growth. And Harrison, desperate to impress the board after 2 flat quarters, had handed him the keys to the kingdom. Monday morning brought a new humiliation. I arrived to find my office relocated, no warning, no explanation. My nameplate had been moved to a windowless room in the basement, next to archived filing storage. A sticky note on my old door read, "Space needed for Strategic Initiatives Team, M.E." The message was clear: you're buried. I spent the morning setting up my new space, transforming it into a fortress of documentation. 3 locked filing cabinets, a personal scanner I'd brought from home, and a white board covered with timeline entries written in code. Only I understood. If Ellison wanted me in the basement, fine. Basements were where people kept their secrets. That afternoon, I made my first real breakthrough. Hidden in the metadata of a PDF contract, I found an earlier version one that showed the original consulting fee was $100,000. Someone, likely Ellison himself, had edited it to $800,000 before final execution, but the system had saved both versions. I printed everything, the original, the edited version, the metadata showing the timestamp and user ID of who made the change. Then I backed it up 3 ways: encrypted USB, personal cloud storage, and hard copies in a safety deposit box I'd rented during lunch. By 5 p.m., the office was emptying out. I heard footsteps in the hallway, unusual for this part of the building. Ellison appeared in my doorway, his silhouette blocking the fluorescent light. "Cozy," he said, looking around my cramped space. "Probably better for someone like you. Less distracting." I looked up from my screen, meeting his eyes. I work better without distractions. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Keep your head down. Do your little compliance checks, and everyone stays happy. Rock the boat, and well, he shrugged. Not everyone's cut out for the new Westford. After he left, I added his visit to my log. Date, time, witnesses none, and his exact words, every threat, every intimidation, every piece of evidence that showed consciousness of guilt. He thought he'd won by banishing me to the basement. He had no idea he'd just given me the perfect hunting ground. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. I'd been cross-referencing bank statements from public filings Westford had to disclose major vendor payments in quarterly reports, when I noticed something odd. The consulting fees to Pinnacle Advisory Group weren't just suspicious. They were part of a larger pattern. I spread the papers across my living room floor, creating a web of connections with red string like some conspiracy theorist in a movie. But this wasn't paranoia. This was mathematical precision. $800,000 to Pinnacle Advisory. 2 days later, Pinnacle transferred $750,000 to Meridian Consulting LLC. Meridian then split the money $500,000 to Evergreen Strategic Partners, $250,000 to a company called Sunset Holdings. I'd never heard of Sunset, but a quick search revealed it was registered in the Cayman Islands. Classic money laundering, but the amounts were specific, deliberate. Why these exact figures? I pulled up the Riverside Bridge contract again. Total value $40 million. The consulting fees represented exactly 2%. I checked 3 other contracts. Same thing. Every inflated contract included consulting fees of exactly 2%, split and washed through the same network of shell companies. But where did the money ultimately go? Florida corporate records gave me the answer. Evergreen Strategic Partners, the company owned by Ellison's brother-in-law, had purchased a commercial property in Miami 3 weeks ago. Purchase price $975,000. Cash transaction. I did the math. 4 contracts, each with 2% skimmed off the top, washed through shells, consolidated in Evergreen. Total $1 million. Just enough for a Miami property and some walking around money. My hands shook as I photographed everything. This wasn't just contract fraud or simple embezzlement. This was a sophisticated bribery and kickback scheme. Ellison was taking bribes from contractors, disguising them as consulting fees, then washing the money through multiple companies before it landed in his family's pockets. I needed more proof. The paper trail was damning, but prosecutors would want the smoking gun direct evidence of quid pro quo. Monday morning, I arrived at 5 a.m. and logged into our email archive system, another tool Ellison didn't know existed because he exclusively used his phone and personal laptop. But corporate email compliance meant everything was archived, even deleted messages. I searched for communications between Ellison and the contractors. Most were clean, professional. Then I found it an email thread from Ellison's account to Phoenix Construction's CEO, sent at 11:47 p.m., probably after a few drinks. Don't worry about the safety certs. My people won't be a problem. Just make sure the consulting arrangement is structured as discussed. 2 points, no more, no less. The response came at 12:15 a.m. Understood. Pinnacle Advisory will invoice as agreed. Appreciate the flexibility on the timeline. I kept digging. More emails, more evidence. Ellison had even been brazen enough to send wire instructions from his corporate account, though he'd tried to disguise them as vendor payment protocols. By 7 a.m., I had everything emails explicitly discussing the kickback arrangement, bank records showing the money flow, corporate documents proving the shell company ownership, and a clear pattern across multiple contracts totaling over $1 million in bribes. I organized it all into a comprehensive file. Each document was labeled, annotated, and cross-referenced. I created an executive summary that even a first-year law student could follow. Mark Ellison had accepted over $1 million in bribes from contractors in exchange for expedited approvals and overlooked safety violations. But I wasn't ready to play this card yet. Ellison was cocky, but he wasn't stupid. If I moved too soon, he might find a way to spin it, to blame underlings or claim ignorance. I needed him to dig his hole deeper. That afternoon, I sent him an email. Professional, bureaucratic, boring. Mr. Ellison, during routine compliance review, I've identified several discrepancies in recent contractor agreements that require immediate attention. Federal Regulation 48, CFR 9.4062, regarding contractor responsibility determinations may have been inadvertently overlooked. Please advise on remediation steps. Attached is a preliminary finding summary. Regards, Laura Mitchell. I attached a document that outlined the violations in the most technical, mind-numbing language possible. Buried on page 6 was a single line. Consulting fee structures appear to exceed standard industry benchmarks. His response came within an hour. Laura, I thought I made myself clear about your role here. Stop wasting time on paperwork paranoia and focus on something productive. These contracts have generated millions in revenue while you've been playing hall monitor. Consider this your final warning about undermining executive decisions. M.E. Perfect. He'd just created written evidence that he'd been warned about the violations and chosen to ignore them. More importantly, he'd threatened retaliation against a whistleblower, a federal crime in itself. I printed his email and added it to my file. Then I made 3 copies of everything. 1 for my safety deposit box, 1 for my sister's house, and 1 hidden in my basement office behind a loose panel I'd discovered. The trap was set. Now I just needed the right moment to spring it. The Protocol 0 file had grown to 300 pages. Every transaction, every email, every shell company registration documented, verified, and backed up in triplicate. I'd even created a visualization chart that showed the money flowing from Westford to contractors to Shells to Ellison's family. It looked like a cardiovascular system pumping dirty money instead of blood. Tuesday night, I worked late organizing my evidence into prosecutorial packages. 1 copy formatted for the FBI's white-collar crime division, another tailored for the SEC's whistleblower program, a third prepared for the Infrastructure Oversight Committee. Each version highlighted different violations, different penalties. Ellison hadn't just broken 1 law, he'd shattered a dozen. At 9 p.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Strange, the basement was usually deserted after 5. I minimized my screen and grabbed a random compliance manual, pretending to read. Jennifer from sales appeared in my doorway, her usually perfect composure slightly off. She'd been drinking. Still here, Laura. She leaned against the doorframe. Don't you have a life? Just finishing some reviews. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Reviews. God, you really don't get it. Do you? Mark's already got Harrison convinced to eliminate the compliance department. Says it's redundant with our external auditors. My blood chilled, but I kept my expression neutral. When? Next quarter, maybe sooner. She studied her manicure. He wanted me to tell you. Said it would be funny coming from me. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw something human in her eyes. I'm sorry about the meeting. The laughing, that was unprofessional. After she left, I sat in the darkness for a full minute. Ellison wasn't just corrupt. He was eliminating the only department that could expose him. If compliance was dissolved, all our files would be archived, buried, probably destroyed in a convenient server migration. I couldn't wait any longer. That night, I created the kill shot, a single USB drive containing everything, indexed and searchable, with an executive summary that began, evidence of systematic fraud, bribery, and money laundering involving VP Mark Ellison and $1 million in federal contract violations. But I needed insurance. If Ellison suspected I was onto him, I might not make it to morning with my job or worse. So I set up a dead man's switch using a scheduled email service. If I didn't log in every 24 hours to reset it, the entire Protocol 0 file would automatically send to the FBI, the SEC, the Department of Justice, and every member of Westford's board of directors. Wednesday morning, I sent Ellison another email, this time copying our general counsel, Rebecca Martinez. Mr. Ellison, following up on my previous compliance notice dated Monday, federal law requires written acknowledgement of potential violations within 72 hours. Please confirm receipt and intended remediation actions. Note that failure to respond constitutes willful negligence under Section 1001 of Title 18. Best regards, Laura. I knew Rebecca wouldn't ignore a Section 1001 reference that was prison territory. Within minutes, she called me. Laura, what's this about? I've identified significant irregularities in our contractor payment structures, potential FCPA violations. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The nuclear word in corporate compliance. How significant? 7 figures, minimum. Silence. Then. Document everything. Don't discuss this with anyone else. I'm scheduling an emergency audit committee meeting for Friday. Ellison's response came an hour later, CCing Harrison and the entire executive team. Rebecca. Laura. This is exactly the kind of bureaucratic fear-mongering that's paralyzing our growth. I've reviewed the contracts in question personally. Everything is above board. The consulting fees are standard industry practice for expedited services. Laura's inability to understand modern business practices shouldn't trigger emergency meetings. I've attached revenue projections showing these contracts have generated $12,000 in profit this quarter alone. I trust we can focus on real issues. Mark Ellison, VP Operations. His attachment was slick, professional.